Well students, today we will discuss about population, consumption and carbon emission. This topic has a strong relevance in the present times, as we all know that world is getting populated in every single minute. With every addition of a child, the number of consumers is increasing, which further leads to carbon emission in direct or indirect form. Therefore, it becomes imperative for us to know about this issue because it has a strong influence on us as well as on our day-to-day activities. Firstly, we will talk about the scenario of population in the world. Graph in insertion 1 shows that at present there are 7.3 billion people in the world and the highest concentration of population resides in Asia, which is the home of 4.4 billion people, whereas Africa is at second rank with 1.2 billion people. Africa is followed by Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean islands, North America and Oceania. At the country level, China and India are the home to more than 1 billion population of the world. These countries are followed by USA, Indonesia, Brazil, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Russian Federation and other countries. Insertion 2 shows the gender equilibrium of the world's population. According to United Nations, by the year 2015, approximately 50.4% of world's population comprised of males, while females constituted 49.6% in the population of the world. Other welcoming characteristic of world's population is shown in the insertion 3, which shows that by 2015, 62% of world's population fell in the age group of 15 to 59 years, which is usually referred as working age group, whereas 26% of world's population was less than 15 years age group and 12% was old or more than 60 years of age. Another feature of present day world's population is its slow growth rate. Presently, the population of the world is growing at the rate of 1.8%. At this rate of population growth, it is estimated that by 2030, the population of the world will be 8.5 billion. It is estimated to rise further to 9.7 billion in 2050. And by the end of this century, the world population will reach to the staggering figure of 11.2 billion. Dear students, it is necessary for you to know the reason behind the slow growth rate of world's population. The primary reason of the slow growth rate of population is the decline in the fertility rates. It is to be noted that at the global level, fertility rates have declined. Among the continents, Africa recorded the highest fertility rate of 4.7 children per woman during 2010-2015, followed by Latin America and the Caribbean islands, where it was 2.5 children per woman. In Asia, fertility rate is 2.2 and in North America it is 1.86 children per woman. While almost all the countries have low fertility rates, except European countries where the fertility rates have increased from 1.55 children per woman in 2005 to 2010 to 1.6 children per woman in 2010 to 2015. Another reason of declining population is the population aging. The aging of population is a primary concern of European nations, where nearly 24% of population is in the age group of 60 years and above. Due to decline in the mortality rates of the world's population, it is projected that by 2050, the population in the age group of 60 years or above will approximately be 66% in Asia's population, 13% in Africa, 11% in Latin America and the Caribbean islands, and 10% in the other countries. It is important to note that the population will remain relatively young in the countries those have reported high fertility rates. Another positive characteristic of the world's population is an increase in the life expectancy rates. Those have increased by 3 years at the global level. It increased from 67 years in 2000 to 2005 to 70 years in 2010 to 2015. Urbanization is another component of population that has a strong bearing effect on consumption patterns and carbon emissions. At the global level, urbanization has outpaced and rural population. Approximately 54% of the world's population resides in urban centers. The highest concentration of urban population is found in Asia, followed by Africa, Latin America and Caribbean islands, North America, Europe, etc. After getting an overview of population, we will look into the consumption levels of the world. Global resource consumption equals global resource extraction. The world economy uses around 60 billion tons of resources each year to produce the goods and services which we all consume. According to Global Footprint Network, the use of resources and generation of waste produced by humanity at the present times is equivalent to 1.6 planets. Insertion 4 shows the moderate United Nations scenario of population and consumption. It suggests that if current population and consumption trends will continue, then by the 2030 we will need the equivalent of 2 Earths to support us. The fall in the resources is primarily a result of collapsing fisheries, diminishing forest cover, depletion of water systems and the build-up of carbon dioxide emissions, which creates problems like global climate change. The Global Footprint Network estimates that human consumption first began to exceed the Earth's capacity in the early 70s, and the overshoot day has been falling steadily earlier ever since due to the growth in the global population alongside the expansion of consumption around the world. If the material consumption is to be considered, it comes to the forefront at the global level. Material consumption equals resource extraction. According to the researchers and scientists, the world economy used around 68 billion tons of resources in 2007 to produce the goods and services which were consumed by us. Map in insertion 5 depicts that in terms of per capita consumption, a large difference exists between the continents. In Europe, around 37 kg of resources were extracted per person per day, whereas the consumption was around 58 kg per person per day. Therefore, Europeans needed to import resources from other countries to maintain their level of consumption, whereas North Americans on an average consumed around 81 kg per day and in Oceania about 131 kg per day. On an average, in comparison to Europe, people in these continents have bigger houses, higher meat consumption and own big cars. These differences in lifestyle increase the resource consumption. Resource consumption remained poor in other countries of the world. In Asia, material consumption was about 14 kg and resource extraction around 15 kg per person per day. The average material consumption of an African was only around 10 kg per day, whereas extraction was of 13 kg per day. Overall, it can be said that a European consumes around more than 4 times as many as resources as an inhabitant of Asia and almost 6 times as much as an average African. Inhabitants of other countries consumes up to 15 times more than people in the developing countries. After consumption, we will discuss about the status of carbon emission in the world. After getting an overview of population and consumption, it becomes important to know about the carbon emissions which are considered as a direct and indirect consequences of population and their consumption behavior. As we have already discussed it in the previous lectures that climate change is a serious cause of concern at the global level. Climate change is the reflection of global warming. Global warming rises due to increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases. Among the greenhouse gases, the biggest contributor gas is carbon dioxide. The primary source of increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the use of fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide can also be emitted from direct human induced activities such as deforestation, land clearing for agriculture, degradation of soil, etc. With an event of development with use of those resources which emit carbon has increased many folds, as it can be seen in insertion 6. World Resource Institute estimated that global carbon emissions were 150 times higher in 2011 than they were in 1850. Map in insertion 7 shows that at the beginning of this period, that is 1850, the United Kingdom was the top emitter of carbon dioxide. The emissions in United Kingdom were nearly 6 times higher than the United States of America. The other industrial developed countries which France, Germany and Belgium completed the list of top 5 emitters. In 2011, China ranked as world's largest emitter, followed by the United States of America, India, Russia and Japan. It is significant to observe that the United States of America was the world's second largest emitter in both years. However, its emissions in 2011 were 266 times greater than those in 1850. Between 1850 and 1960, the world generally experienced a constant growth of carbon emission in these countries, which developed largely due to industrialization and population growth. While the United States of America kept its place as the top carbon dioxide emitter until 2005. Asian countries also started to emerge as big carbon emitters by this time. The United Kingdom, which was once the world's highest emitter, stabilized its total carbon dioxide emission. Russia experienced a significant reduction in emission with the dissolution of Soviet Union. China overtook the United States of America as the world's largest emitter after 2005, and by the year 2007, carbon dioxide emission from the developing world exceeded those of industrial nations. The graph in insertion 8 shows that in 2011 the countries have changed, but the top 10 emitters still contributed 78% of the total global carbon emissions. The remarkable change in the carbon dioxide emissions in 2014, when after a decade of very high annual growth rates of global carbon emissions of 4% on average, followed by 2 years of slowdown to about 1%, the growth in emission almost stalled in 2014 with an increase of only 0.5% to 35.7 billion tons carbon dioxide. The 6 largest emitting countries in 2014 were China 30%, the United States of America 15%, the European Union 9.6%, India 6.6%, the Russian Federation 5% and Japan 3.6%. Significant trends were seen in the top 3 emitting countries, which accounted for 54% of the total global emission. In China and the United States of America, emissions increased only 0.9%. The European Union saw a large decrease of 5.4% in 2014 as compared to 2013, which counterbalanced the 7.8% growth in India. The Russian Federation and Japan saw their carbon dioxide emissions decline by 1.5% and 2.6% respectively. Dear students, now we will study the relationship between population, consumption and carbon emission. Increasing population growth and unsustainable consumption together pose two of the greatest challenges to the world. Most of this population is going to increase in low income countries. Global consumption levels will remain high in the developed countries because of the high per capita consumption. The population and patterns of consumption holds relevance for policymakers because firstly, they determine the rates at which natural resources are exploited and the ability of the earth to sustainably provide the food, water, energy and other resources required by its inhabitants. Current patterns of consumption, especially in high income countries, are eroding natural capital at rates that are severely damaging the interests of future generations. Secondly, population is an important component of a complex nexus of processes that determine the economic and social development of a country. Rapid population growth can be an obstacle to improve standards of living in poor countries, to eliminate poverty and to reduce gender inequality. If the right conditions are in place, measures that reduce fertility rates while respecting human rights can stimulate and facilitate economic development, improve health and living standards, and increase political and social stability and security. Thirdly, changes in population age structure may occur as a result of declining birth and death rates that can have important social, economic and potentially environmental consequences. Aging of population in all the high, many of the middle and some of the low income countries is occurring at historically unprecedented rates, while in some low income countries the proportion of children and young people is very high. Fourth, population growth can contribute to movement of people, for example, from the countryside to cities or between countries. By 2050, 70% of the world's population is expected to live in cities with significant challenges for urban planning and logistics. While urbanization and migration may present opportunities for economic and social development and resource efficiencies, if unexpected and unplanned, they can be economically and politically destructive and have serious environmental impacts. Fifth, the combination of unsustainable consumption patterns, especially in high income countries, and of the number of people on the planet directly affect the capacity of the earth to support its natural biodiversity. When the status of population, consumption and carbon emission are taken into account, it shows that world consumption patterns are breaking new records. People are consuming more meat, driving more cars and generating more plastic than before, say the World Watch Institute's latest report published in 2015 titled Vital Signs, Volume 22, the trends that are shaping our future. The report states that the depletion of resources and pollution driven by our consumption choices may have worse than expected social and environmental costs. According to vital signs, global meat production has more than quadrupled in the last half century to over 308 million tons in 2013. At the same time, aquaculture production has increased about 10 times since 1984. But this increase in production comes with huge costs for the environment. The meat industry uses huge quantities of water, fodder, and grazing land to produce meat. Coffee production has also doubled since the early 1960s. But volatile prices of coffee threatened the livelihoods of 25 million coffee growers worldwide. A major drop in prices of coffee beans to around $0.5 per pound in 2001 nearly wiped out the economies of coffee producing nations. Despite this rise in demand for and production of food, 1 in 9 people in the world still goes hungry. 51 countries ended up importing more than half of their food grains requirements in 2013. Plastic production has touched 299 million tons in 2013, but since only a small proportion of plastic is recycled, waste from these products clog landfills and pollute our oceans. A report by the World Watch Institute also says despite rising consumption in the developing world, developed countries remain responsible for the bulk of the world's resource consumption as well as the associated global environmental degradation. Aggressive pursuits of a mass consumption society also correlates with a decline in health indicators in many countries as obesity, crime, and other social ills continue to surge, see the report. It is to be noted that carbon footprints of our consumption is much higher than we have expected. Consumption of meat leads to higher emission of greenhouse gases. Graph in insertion 9 shows that apart from housing, transport and services, food has an important role to play as a contributor in carbon emission. After understanding the relationship between population and consumption, we will discuss about energy consumption and carbon emission. Fossil fuel combustion accounts for about 90.5% of the total global carbon dioxide emissions, excluding those from forest fires and the use of wood fuel. Despite the fact that the global economy continued to grow at 3.3% in 2014 as compared to 2013, the carbon dioxide emission from global fuel combustion decreased by 0.17%, which is the first decline in the annual carbon dioxide growth over the past 5 years. It is to keep in notice that consumption levels affect carbon dioxide emission through two main channels. The first is through direct emission from household energy requirements, including cooking, hot water use and heating. The second is via indirect emission from non-energy residential consumption goods and services, which emit carbon dioxide during rather than after the production process. The impact of human behavior on carbon dioxide emission are primarily manifested in production and consumption behaviors. This observation indicates that to satisfy consumption demands, people create wealth for society by participating in production activities, leading to inevitable emission in a specific stage restricted to the levels of productivity and resources endowment. Thus, it can be concluded from the discussion at the global level, a link exists between the population, consumption and carbon emissions. Globally, the population is increasing continuously. More than half of the world's population lies in the working age group of 15 to 59 years, and approximately 54% of the population of the world lives in urban areas. The consumption rate is usually high among the working age group, and the people residing in the urban areas consumes more resources than their rural counterparts. Thus, it becomes clear that the increasing burden of population has resulted into an increase in the stress on consumption patterns. It has also been suggested that at the present rate of consumption, the resources present on the earth will exhaust soon, and mankind will require a new earth to feed its population. It has also been observed from the discussion that consumption and carbon emissions have a positive relationship. The per capita carbon emissions have remained quite high in those countries where consumption rates are high, whereas poor developing countries which consumes less tend to emit less carbon. Thank you.